Hello, everyone, and thank you for your attendance in this session. My name is Dr. Matt Cook. On behalf of my co-author, Jamie Sisty, we would like to thank you for your attendance today and your attention to our paper in progress, 365 Days of Over-Tourism, Tourism Calendars, and the Over-Promotion of Tourist Receiving Destinations. All right, so in late spring 2020, as COVID-19 started to wreak havoc on the global tourism industry, along with much of the world, the British newspaper The Guardian published a startling long-form article entitled "The End of Tourism." I've got a screenshot for part of that article for you here, so you can kind of get a sense for what it was talking about. Beginning with the cruise ship sector's deadly run of horrors at the beginning of 2020, before much was really known about the virus, the author of the piece, Christopher de Beleg, argued that as go cruise ship lines and the cruise ship industry in general, so goes the majority of the entire tourism sector. Now, for some parts of the world that are heavily over-touristed, that might not have been seen as such a negative situation, despite the possibility of economic uncertainty, and really has only been in the last month or so, the last few weeks really here in March and April of 2021, that we have started to see airline traffic starting to approach the same levels as one indicator of the tourism sector, of course, that approaching levels that were on par with the pre-pandemic levels. Sorry there. Just to give you a little bit of an understanding of this idea of over-tourism as we get started, over-tourism as an area of study within tourism studies has come into its own since this hashtag, over-tourism, was first used on Twitter in 2012. And so over-tourism as a concept occurs when the level of tourism demand in a given location exceeds the means of the site or the tourism supply to support that demand. And now that can be in terms of space, the environment, or human resources, etc. And this can lead to negative impacts on the local population and the environment, and if left unchecked, potentially the local economy. So being declared as over-touristed, whether on social media or by word of mouth, is one reason the tourists may decide not to visit a given destination. Sites considered to be too crowded or overly touristy, as in those that maybe cater primarily to mass tourists, carry many negative connotations in the tourism world. So overcrowding, unsustainability, and the spread of invasive species can all be issues that are linked to over-tourism. Now, to tell you a little bit about our work that's been ongoing. This is Jamie, who couldn't be with us today. Her looking, real thrilled to be being photographed here. But for this paper, we conducted a photographic content analysis of three 365-day tear-off calendars that are popular, like end-of-the-year holiday gifts. The inspiration for this research came to me after I realized that I had two such tear-off calendars from very different publishers or different companies. One that is based on the 1,000 Places to See Before You Die book series, and then another that was based on the Lonely Planet travel guides and that publisher. And I received these exactly a decade apart. So I received one in 2009, and then the Lonely Planet one I got in 2019. And so as I was using the 2019 calendar, after a couple of months, I started to realize that, despite the differences in these two brands, there was considerable overlap with the 1,000 Places tear-off calendar that I happened to receive a decade earlier. And I just happened to keep those pages in a box and had left the box in my office. And so for our photographic content analysis, you can see here in the photo, this is Jamie and I meeting over the course of the summer. I can't seem to use my mouse at the moment, so just look at the photograph. And then you can sort of see in the foreground bottom edge of the photo what some of these tear-off calendars look like. And so we took the one that I had from 2009, the 2019 Lonely Planet, and then Jamie had the idea that we should also get a 1,000 Places calendar from 2019 and go through that one as well. So we went through each, and this is just a snapshot of kind of the method of going through counting, page by page, which countries were being represented, and then getting, counts over there on the side. So in addition to documenting the countries and the type, we also documented, I should say, the type of tourism activity that was represented using a typology created by Velvet Nelson in her book, Tourism Geographies. So this led to a number of interesting research questions as one of these kind of projects that can easily be done from the office without having to spend a lot of money going out into the field. Always a good idea to have one of these projects, kind of side projects going on the back burner. It's a little, advice for those grad students in the audience. So our research questions, just a few here. We had a number of questions to start with, but kind of culled them down into a handful. Do tourism promotional calendars actually contribute to over-tourism? Are certain places, destinations, or countries overrepresented across this sample of products of tourism calendars? And these are ones that are available, I should note, pretty widely in the United States, or more generally in the Anglophone market, given that all three were in English. And then what are the major themes and types of products that were prevalent from a tourism standpoint in the imagery that gets selected for those calendars? And most of those images tended to come from large stock photo websites. So in each of the calendars near the back, usually there was one last page or two last pages that actually listed where the sources of all their photographs came from. So let's talk a little bit about our findings. First of all, we can break this down into the subregions. Now we used a list of countries that came from ESRI and there, so it's a spreadsheet that's meant to work in with their mapping database software. We haven't done the mapping portion of that yet, although we intend to, so we can start to see more visually where the countries are represented. But using at least their sub-regional breakdown, we started to notice a pretty obvious pattern. And in fact, another paper title that we were considering for this research would be #tourism so white, as in white racially, because the number of countries that, or the number of subregions that were most heavily underused tended to be concentrated in places like Africa. So is this spreadsheet here kind of shows for you absolutely no locations in Middle Africa, 3, ironically enough, 1 in each for Antarctica, because you can actually tour Antarctica. So I like to featuring penguins, but then Central Asia, Melanesia, Western Africa, Southern Africa, the Caribbean, and Northern Africa. So a number of these places in Africa are at the bottom of the rankings in terms of representation. In contrast to that, if we look at the highest number of rankings by subregion, Australia, New Zealand, South America, Western Europe, Southern Europe, Northern Europe, and Northern America. So a number of these are skewed a little bit. I think we can explain Australia and New Zealand, especially that number 30 in the Lonely Planet rankings. We can explain that a bit because Lonely Planet is based in Melbourne, Australia. And then in the Northern America category, that one is heavily skewed by the first 2009 1,000 Places calendar, which has 86, as you can see. It was very heavily skewed that one particular year towards representing the United States in its destinations, although that did taper off, as you can see in the 2019 rankings. Another thing that we can do with this is actually look at individual countries. And so ranking these with the breakdown by each of the 3 calendar types, still the United States shows up very near the top, at the very top, and the United Kingdom also right there in number 2. And then another number of other major tourist receiving destinations like France, Italy, Australia, Canada, China, New Zealand. So all of these are leading to our suggested finding that yes, based on representation in these images, tourism calendars may indeed be contributing to over-tourism. Another thing that we looked at is the breakdown by what products or types of tourism offerings were actually being represented. So this required us to be a little bit analytical in looking at the images to analyze, does this qualify as, say, for example, nature tourism? And in most cases, as you can see, Lonely Planet especially tended to feature the natural scenery as if there was no one in these sites. There were very few people represented in the images chosen for these calendars. In contrast to that, you might say, well, why doesn't ecotourism show up very much? And we only specified it as ecotourism if the text on the image, because sometimes it's an image and maybe a quote or a little bit of information about the site. If that specifically represented or referenced ecotourism, then we categorize it as ecotourism. But for the most part, it was pretty uncritical, just nature tourism. Interestingly, mass S tourism, that's sea, sand, sun, surf, all of those sort of S titles that are affiliated with largely beach tourism, that shows up pretty heavily as a category, but not nearly as much as the nature tourism or heritage tourism, and even more general cultural tourism. So if things weren't looking like they were specifically historical or heritage driven forms of tourism, but also seemed to be kind of generally cultural, that's when we used the general cultural category. So let's look specifically at a few interesting cases. Now, we still have a good bit of analysis to do in this, but one of the things we started to notice when we were working our way through these images, catalog or calendar by calendar, I should say, we started to notice that some images seem to be almost exactly the same. And in this case, you can notice there are slight distinctions, but still the general theme is almost this exact same shot of the Grand Canal from the Rialto Bridge in Venice, similarly having the gentleman punting down the river with tourists in the boats, in the gondoliers. And then, of course, this quote, "Venice is the city of mirrors, the city of mirages, at once solid and liquid, at once air and stone," and whatever that's supposed to mean. I guess it's supposed to bring you in and draw you in. And so here we see in both on the left, I believe, hopefully that shows up the same in your video. The left is an image from Lonely Planet, and then the one on the right, of course, advertises itself as being from the 1,000 Places to See Before You Die. Or another example where here we see yet another site in Italy, Cinque Terre, a very famous location, famous imagery for tourism. This one actually shows up twice in the same company's calendar, right? So Lonely Planet actually uses it twice, once in the daytime and once at night. But similarly, you see a very similar image, almost exactly the same as the first one, the daytime shot. In fact, it might even be, but one is cropped. But the boats are in almost exactly the same position. I find that to be a little suspicious. So maybe even using the same images, and certainly the same destinations and same vantage points, same photographic spots you're supposed to capture as a tourist, right? Or Easter Island in Chile, or off the coast of Chile. Similarly, here you have, I'll go back over that one more time, the images twice in the 2019 catalog, or I keep saying catalog, I mean calendar, from Lonely Planet, or similarly in the 1,000 Places to See Before You Die. Similarly, situation in featuring places like in Cambodia, the Great Wall of China, of course, Mont Saint-Michel in France, off the coast of Normandy, all of these sort of relatively well-known images, but being featured across a variety of these calendar products. Now, so I'm almost out of time, and there's not really much in the way of a conclusion at this point, because this research is still ongoing, and we plan to write about it some over the summer as the time comes available, with so many fascinating case studies that can be looked at from a seemingly simple cultural everyday kind of object. Even something like a tear-off calendar could have interesting geographical research for us to look at as geographers, and with the lens of looking at tourism can provide some interesting insights into ongoing issues like over-tourism in the tourism sector. I'll say goodbye for now. Please let me know if you have any questions. I'd love to hear from you.